Afternoon. Glad you could be here this afternoon. We are here to take comments regarding development issues. I'm Wayne Dice. I'm the planning director. We have some of our staff up here. Eric Cortinez, Emily Boyette, Kim Burmeister, Nancy Milford, and Buford King. They're all from the city staff. This is an open forum, so we don't have anything prepared to show you, but we want to hear your feedback on concerns, issues, changes that you would like to see. This is an open forum to get comments from you guys. I'm going to sit down in a few minutes and just hear from you guys. As you know, we're in a moratorium. We're looking at trying to change various processes. We've got a few things we've worked on, but nothing that's really firm yet. But we do think it's important to get your feedback. Most of you are the ones that go through the process. I think in Fairhope we want good quality development as efficiently as possible with less, bureaucracy as we can. Obviously, it takes our time and your time. But again, this is an open forum, so we want to hear from you, what you all have to say. We'll be taking notes. This also is live streamed, so it'll be recorded as well. We'll be taking notes and trying to address your concerns as we hear those. And hopefully this will result in some changes that will be beneficial to the city as well as the development community and the public in general. And so if you would, since it is being live streamed, would you please come to the microphone here when you want to speak, and we'll take it from there. So we'll get started. Whoever wants to come up first, again, please come to the microphone so we can record it, and we'll be taking your notes down and trying to address those concerns. So let's go ahead and get kicked off. And who wants to be first?
I do.
Yes, sir.
That is kind of a background.
Yeah, come on up.
Sure. My name's Moke O'Connor. I live down at Founders Square. So, Wayne and crew, we just finished a 6-month, or just about to finish a 6-month moratorium, and it's been extended. From your perspective, what are you gaining by having the moratorium? What's the purpose of it? What do you see coming out the other end of it?
Right. Well, first of all, we're here to take comments about the development stuff, but we will talk about the moratorium if you like. I think one of the main concerns, and I came here in February, so I wasn't here in the beginning of the moratorium, but as I understand it, one of the main concerns was the infrastructure. Right now, there are a couple of studies going on with infrastructure that we're looking at. Some of the sewer facilities were a concern, so that's being evaluated. From the planning side, we're looking at processes and procedures we have. And during the moratorium time, we were trying to maybe update those and get those to a point where we feel like it's beneficial to the city as well as the development community and the public as a whole. But the primary concern, as I see it, is really some of the infrastructure and how it relates to development. There are several things we are looking at internally as far as infrastructure and how we evaluate those new developments as they come in and tie on to our infrastructure. And so that's something that Richard Peterson and I have talked about and are looking at, and there'll be probably some minor changes to that process as well. But during the moratorium time, I think primarily it given us time to complete those studies and to again address some of the procedural issues we have of how developments are approved. Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. All right. Who wants to be next?
I do.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Dot Yeager, and you can tell I've been here forever. But anyway, what I need to ask is, first of all, this is the book that I go by for zoning, and it was new in 2006, and every time I've asked for a new one, they said, we haven't printed any. Are there any more that are up to date than this one for us to go by?
Yes, ma'am, there is. It's available online, but we can also print a copy and be sure and get that to you.
Because this is so important to everybody that has anything to do with real estate, and I've depended on this, and sometimes it's right and sometimes it's not, so It's kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
Now, there was one other thing I wanted to ask you. It's about zoning B3A and B3B. They are such vague zoning, and when you have a piece of property that has one of those zonings, you can't tell people what they can do with it because the description in here is so vague, and then you go and ask for something, and if it's not what they think needs to be there, then you're back where you started from. You spend a lot of time and effort and money, but you don't know what you can do with it.
And Dot, that's a great comment, and that's one of the things that we are definitely trying to look at. One of our mantras is we want to be consistent.
Yep.
And having vague terms does create some inconsistencies because new people come in and they interpret things differently. And so we are certainly trying to address those concerns as far as being consistent, defined terms. I'm very geared towards creating definitions, so there is no disagreement about what something says. And that's something we'll definitely look at. And
Okay, there's one more thing that sort of bothers me. I don't know how many years ago, it hadn't been that long, when they came up with a zoning that was a parking zoning in Fairhope. And there are many parking lots that are on residential areas now that are not zoned for parking. And I know that most of the churches use them, and I'm not condemning churches. I wish they'd go out on 10 acres, but nevertheless, it would be a lot better because everybody wants to live downtown close to Fairhope. That's what they really want to do. And all these empty lots that are all over that people really want are used for parking lots, but I don't think they're zoned for them. So I'm just really kind of questioning that a little bit.
Well, if you have a church, for example, and there's a parking lot associated with that church, many times that would be considered an accessory use to the church. So it wouldn't be the primary use. And so I think in
But
some
I hadn't
areas...
read that anywhere, but why
That's
do
right.
we have parking zoning then?
I'm new here. I've been here about 5 or 6 months, and so I'm not sure when
I'm
that
not
was
trying to
created.
be negative. I'm just
Right.
trying to get things in my mind that I can understand, and some of it I don't.
Sure. Well, we'll be glad to look into that for you. As far as getting the book printed, we can get you that. It is available online as well, which is a searchable copy. You can do a word search, which is very helpful, I think, when you can word search it online, but we can certainly print you a copy if you like and give you one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. But we are, some of the vagueness, we are trying to address that as well and trying to be consistent. And that helps how it's applied each time the same way every time. That was something that we believe is important to creating a good land development code. Yes, sir.
I'm Chris Haley, and I just had a project before you guys, as you know, and spent nearly a year going through the approval process. And I have a few anecdotal things that I learned in that process that I think need to be addressed. Most notably is the multi-occupancy review process required. Anytime you have a multi-use building, you're required to sort of run 2 applications. And you've got site plan approval and subdivision approval, basically. So my project that came before the Planning Commission was a downtown mixed-use project and was properly zoned. And I had to spend extra money, extra time, 2 public hearings instead of 1. It's just very cumbersome. And Wayne, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I'm sure there are other developers who've had to go through the same process, and it just seems to be extra work on everybody, and a lot of it's redundant. And so I'd like to have some conversation about that at some point. And the other thing is the impact fee situation. I have no problem with impact fees. Most developers you talk to have no problems, but it's unclear where our impact fees are earmarked for. Some goes to recreation, some goes to police. And the best I can tell, very little and maybe none of it is earmarked for infrastructure. And from my perspective, my particular project, the infrastructure is lacking. The fire flow water situation is not what it needs to be. I'm going to pay a bunch of money in impact fees, but none of that's going to go to improve any of that infrastructure or future infrastructure. And that just doesn't seem like the right setup to me.
Sure. Thank you, Chris, for those comments. The MOP, the multiple occupancy, that does seem like a redundant process when you do have a site plan review. And the site plan review is only required when you're within the corporate limits if you meet certain thresholds. So it does seem a bit redundant because we are looking at some of the same things. That's something we'll look at and try to address. As far as the impact fees go, that's by ordinance. And I'm not sure, Eric, if you want to address that.
I turned my mic off because it won't turn off, and I tend to talk to myself, so I didn't want to subject you all to that. But impact fees are based on percentage. The way that it works, we have an ordinance that establishes impact fees on commercial buildings. It's per 1,000 square feet of a building, so it'll give a total $3,200 per 1,000 square feet. So by the ordinance wording, if it's a 10,000 square foot building, that's $32,000 impact fee. The enabling legislation at the state level only allows us to charge,
we can only charge a maximum of 1% of the cost of a project for an impact fee. So it's either the numbers, how it works in the ordinance, or 1%. And those impact fees are specifically divided. A percentage goes to Parks and Rec, a percentage goes to police, a percentage goes to fire, and a percentage goes to infrastructure. But the infrastructure, it's actually streets. The way that it's worded, there is not a percentage that goes to water and sewer. Water and sewer expenses, I'm assuming, are being taken out of the tap fees. That money that builds up from sewer and water tap fees go to upgrading that infrastructure.
Is that actually what happens with the tap fees? I mean, is that money being reinvested in infrastructure?
I'm assuming yes. I mean, I know we just did, I think it was a $10 or $12 million plant upgrade. I don't handle, once we collect the fees at the building department, I don't handle the financials of where it actually goes, but I would assume yes, because those are locked in, I believe, by ordinance as to how they're spent.
But, I mean, that's a great comment. I mean, I agree, you are spending money on impact fees, and you want to see some benefit from that. So, I mean, I think that's a great comment. We can look to provide some answers for you on that. I think that's a good comment. All right, who's next? Hi, Kathy, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
I'm Kathy Barnett, and I'm with Dewberry Preble Risch as their environmental scientist. And in the wetlands ordinance, we have the definition of wetlands, but we don't define jurisdictional versus isolated. And I know that some of the original intent was to make sure that we're preserving all of our wetlands. But where we have a core permit that gives us a non-jurisdictional letter and says it's an isolated wetland, particularly when we're trying to use it for the same function, like a stormwater basin, the wetlands ordinance and trying to comply with that makes it rather cumbersome. So I don't know if we can look at the wetlands ordinance and the intent of isolated versus jurisdictional, particularly when we have a clearance letter from the Corps and with the new promulgation of the EPA regs and waters of the U.S. I think we need to look at that. I think the intent of obviously making sure that we're protecting our wetlands and serving that function is important, but we do need to look at, when we get those clearance letters, what the purpose of that wetland is and how we can define it so that we can use that property.
Right. Now, an isolated wetland would be like a Grady Pond or something?
It is. And the Corps claims, so what our process tends to be is we delineate the wetlands, and so they may still meet the characteristics, but the Corps, there's no connectivity or no significant nexus. And so the Corps will give us a letter that says it's not jurisdictional, so it's not subject to wetland fill permit or any, permitting needed. But we do not differentiate that in the city of Fairhope. So we still have to comply with all of the mitigation requirements for the ordinance, and that's particularly when it's serving the same biological function like a stormwater basin or containing water.
Right.
Trying to meet that ordinance is really hard.
Right, okay. Thanks for the comment, I appreciate it.
And I'd be happy to serve on any committee or any way to
Okay.
help define that with the purpose.
Hey, Wayne, just to let you know, we've had a couple of meetings yesterday. I requested a meeting with the home builders to talk about some possible revisions to building code things, because I handle building code and I handle a lot of drainage stuff. We talked about drainage yesterday. I have contacted a couple of our wetland companies to see about doing a meeting towards the end of this month and bring in, I know I've asked Dr. Veter, I've talked to Gina Todia, I've got a message out to Tom Hutchings so that we can sit and talk about it. None of us were here when that ordinance was written, so it's hard to say what the exact intent was. It is very restrictive. It's probably the most restrictive you're going to see. So we're at least going to look at it. I can't promise we'll make any changes, but we are going to discuss it with our wetland professionals, and we would love to have you as part of that.
And that ordinance does apply in the police jurisdiction as
It
well.
does.
So
It
goes
applies,
a little
yeah,
further out
police
than the corporate
jurisdiction
limits.
as well.
Right.
I'm
Yes,
Mike
sir.
Lebitard. I'm an architect, and I guess the question I'm going to ask is a two-point question. Been doing some work here in the mixed-use occupancy type projects, and I've done that in multiple cities throughout the southern part of the United States. And one of the questions I had and we were looking at is when we do a mixed-use occupancy, say downtown Fairhope, whether we have a restaurant below and we're wanting to do living above. Once we do the living above, we're required to have on-site parking, which in a lot of cases, some of the old buildings, for an example, let's take the old hardware store as an example. There may be some room up there to be able to do some condominiums or some apartments, but we would require to have off-street parking there. And has been looked at to whether that is still a requirement, or you're looking at maybe going to change like a lot of the other cities are doing, to where they're not requiring the on-site parking, but allow you to park on the street, but not designated? And the other question is, has the height restriction from 35 feet on the commercial, have y'all looked at increasing that height? And
Yeah, and to answer those questions, yes, we've looked at all of those. One of the things that was conveyed to me is we want to try to spur reinvestment in downtown and create some reinvestment, some remodeling, those kind of things. So we have discussed the issue of the height. One of the things we've been talking about is maybe a height limit of 40 feet and 3 stories. Again, that would have to go through the normal process, but that's something we've discussed. And also, as you mentioned, having the required parking is a barrier to downtown mixed use. It's a barrier to having any kind of units that are residential downtown. We have a parking deck that typically is underutilized for the most part. So parking is tight downtown in some spaces, but the parking deck is not utilized as much as I believe it should be. We are doing some wayfinding programs where we're directing people to where the parking deck is or where other public parking is, which will help that. But I do believe that most of the sites downtown, there is no place to put parking. There's a few unique spaces where you can park on site, but that's rare, and that is a big barrier. I believe having a mixed use project downtown with dwelling units kind of creates activity downtown, which is always good for business and actually bringing more people. When the place is dead, people don't want to go there. When people are there, they want to go. So we are looking at that, and those are two of the strategies that we've kind of looked at and have actually kind of threw some ideas around and drawn up some proposed ideas as far as how to achieve that. But we feel like if we go to a maximum of 3 stories and 40 feet height, you do get a nice ceiling height that's attractive and more modern, without getting a building that overpowers downtown. We think that's a good happy medium. Obviously, that's something we'd like to get comments on from people. So whoever, if something you would like to see, that'd be great, and we'd like to hear about that. And also, again, the parking issue. We are. And I would probably prefer to see that on-site parking requirement go away and direct people to the parking deck or on-site parking. Now, obviously, there's concern with parking, and we're always looking for parking areas and to better utilize the parking we currently have. So that's something we're also looking at too. I know Sherry Lee's got some ideas. We've got some brat stops downtown. We're going to have some transit and some things like that. So, which will also help us utilize the parking better as well. Great question. Thank you for the comment. Hello, Andy. How are you?
Good. How are you? I'm Andy Bowe with Dewberry. I've got a couple of things. One's the LID requirements. Have kind of an arbitrary 10 required out of a list of 15 that may or may not apply to the site we're working on, and those are applied to every site regardless of size or wetlands, or topography, what have you. I'd like to see something change there to where we can get LID requirements to be applicable to the site that we're working on. Don't know what that process will be. I'm sure there'll have to be some back and forth on that, but that's one of them. Another one is where we have projects that are in ETJ. The county requirements and the city requirements they conflict a lot of times.
Right. Right.
I know the county doesn't want trees in the right-of-way. Fairhope requires trees in the right-of-way. We have that issue. If we don't put the trees in because the county doesn't want them, we have to bond them, and that's another issue that we have. When we have a project like that, we have to pay fees to the city. We have to pay fees to the county. It's kind of double jeopardy on fees. Those are things I'd like to see some method to change. Don't know exactly what the answer is there, but those are items that I've had issues with. Sure.
Well, as far as the ETJ issues, I've been on both sides of that. I was with the county for 11 years, and I've been on the county side, and I'm now on the city side. And the process does seem a little bit redundant. That's where the state law was written and has been written since the 30s, I believe. The county's process is an internal process. If you're an ETJ, the extraterritorial jurisdiction, you just deal with them on an administrative level. With us, you have to come to our planning commission. But there are some conflicts we need to look at, and that's something that's always bothered me, even when I was with the county. You do have these conflicts. In some areas of the county where the cities have similar regulations as the county does, it's not an issue. But if you're in Fairhope, we have some fairly unique regulations that apply in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, which causes problems. But we want to look at that. I know we would like to go and meet with the county staff and kind of ask them, where do you see the problems at? What ways can we help mitigate that? Because, we want to have good quality of development, but we don't want to cause an issue where you get stuck in a spot where you can't make either side, the county or the city, you can't meet the regulation. We want to have a process to go through where you can do that in a proper way. So we do want to meet with the county and kind of get that ironed out and get that figured out. As far as the LID requirements, that's something we've talked about internally. I'm going to ask Buford if he would kind of talk about what we've discussed, maybe using the handbook for LID. And the LID is low impact development, just certain techniques that you can use for water management and things like that. Buford, you want to discuss that a little bit?
And one of the things that we've discussed internally as a staff is possibly in a future zoning revision is to reference the Alabama LID Handbook, which is a publication of the Alabama Cooperative Extension Service. And it contains numerous low-impact development requirements or low-impact development abilities and different systems, and goes into extreme detail of not only how to design and how to build them, but also the various engineering calculations that back them up. So that's one possibility right there. And what we discussed as staff is maybe not so much mandating a list of 10 or 15 as we have now, but simply set a standard and declare possibly that overall the stormwater system should reduce total suspended solids by 80%, and then leave the engineer with the entire toolbox of engineering tools to accomplish that, with one of those being using those LID techniques in the handbook.
Thank you, Buford. Yeah, and the LID is very important. I think it's very important, and I think it's a worthwhile cause. But I think there are certain different ways you can get to that point. And as Buford said, as long as you're meeting the main goal, how you get there probably is not that material, because each site is a little different. I mean, sometimes you don't have wetlands on your site, or sometimes you have a soil that doesn't support a certain LID requirement. So I think we need to be a little more broader and more inclusive into other methods that may be available. John, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Great dialogue. I really came up here for a purpose, but we're talking about the LID. One of the things when this was adopted, the city of Fairhope had a public meeting or forum similar to this, and all the engineers and professionals give their input on this. But one of the questions I asked was who's going to maintain all these LIDs, particularly in public rights-of-ways, and never got a firm answer on this. And if we have to produce LIDs within public rights-of-ways, let's say the city of Fairhope, my question is who's going to maintain them? And no one ever could.
That's a great question.
There's no mechanism on that, and then if it is, the city needs to be prepared of understanding what the LIDs are consisted of, for they can maintain it. So it's something that needs to be considered.
Sure, absolutely.
If LIDs are in the public rights way,
and those same discussions we've had internally too, John, as far as those being in the city right away, and in some cases, I guess it could be in the county right away too. I guess if you're in the ETJ areas.
We're not really supportive.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're not really supportive of it being in our right of way. We prefer it be on private property. It's too complicated, and it's hard for Public Works to maintain it.
Right.
And we are concerned about that. We raised that as well. We just weren't.
We try to keep it out of it, but I know there's examples and functions for storm drainage. Originally during this meeting, they were talking about the old curb and gutter and inlets and storm sewer pipe were going to go away, and we're going to have all these mechanisms along roadways and all that. And I just, we
Well,
do anything what needs to be done, but the question, this needs to be thought out, if it
There's got to be a
happens.
practical standpoint to that. And I think having that in the city right away is a little bit impractical because, the public works folks, they're out there for a function, and many times they aren't not as knowledgeable as, say, someone who installed it, how to maintain those LID requirements. And so I agree with what Nancy said. I think we would like to migrate away from that, almost entirely migrate away from having those in the right of way.
Okay.
It does overcomplicate things, and I think you can do plenty of things on site to meet those LID requirements.
And we have done numerous developments that none of it's been in the right of ways, but just in case.
And-
It's always been something that I never could answer, or City of Fairhope never answered. They implied this and never followed through with it. The other question I have, and I think Andy touched on it a little bit, is about the bonding of developments. Typically what we do, we bond sidewalks and street trees for a period of 2 years. And the reason for it, it's kind of hard to build houses and construct driveways and construction traffic going in and out of lots without breaking sidewalks or tearing up trees or irrigation for the trees or whatever. So, and it's been a practice, that they have been bonded. I have clients that are developers. Their primary function is to put in all the infrastructure, develop, all the lots, get it recorded, and then they sell, as a developer, the whole development to a home builder. So the home builder is taking the function over as the developer. Usually they even assign the POAs and everything else. The issue has been is that the developers want to bond it. They don't have any problem bonding it. But after they are out, they don't have, the City of Fairhope won't allow the home builder to bond it. And the way we view it, and I think any surety or bank, even if it's a letter of credit, the way they look at it, and the way the city ought to be looking at this, is that, a bond is a bond is a bond. What does it matter if it's the developer, home builder, or whatever? It's a bond that should be, in the event something happens, it can be, recovered.
And in this case, I think the case you're talking about, we had a developer, or a home builder that took down about 25 lots or 30 lots, and they're all contiguous to one another as well.
Right.
Okay. And that's something, the bonding thing, something we've talked about. The bonding process seems very cumbersome to me, just from my experience. And so we are definitely looking for ways to make that process more efficient and also make it a little more flexible if we can, as long as we can make sure that we aren't missing that all the required infrastructure is put in place. But we are looking at that, and we'll definitely try to find a more efficient process. And we've been looking around at other locations, other jurisdictions, see how they do it, and doing some research from that standpoint. I don't see any point in reinventing the wheel. So if you've got a good model you've dealt with before, we'd like to hear about where it is, so we can look at their regulations and maybe contact them.
Right.
And see how they do it, and see if we can't maybe model ours after a very good model from somewhere else.
Yeah. And the other thing is more on the home building side. I deal with a lot of home builders as well, but after the development is finished and something happens to the infrastructure, particularly lumber trucks run over inlets, break inlets. The city comes back and says, well, that's covered under the maintenance bond. Well, the maintenance bond is structured. It's not a maintenance issue. It's a destruction issue. And someone has, either the developer or the home builder, has to pay for it, even though we're not sure who did it. But it's a city road.
Right.
And, unfortunately, that's part of it. And I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's been an issue with home builders particularly, and developers, where they have to fix stuff that someone else has created.
Right.
And it's not a maintenance or a material issue. It's someone broke it or destroyed it or tore up a road. So I don't know what to do about that, but Eric, I know you run into it quite a bit, but it's something that needs some kind of,
Needs to be addressed.
it needs to be addressed. It really does. Who's ultimately, if the developer or is ultimately responsible for it for a period of time, so be it. But sooner or later, it's a city road.
Right.
And it's my understanding the city takes over the roads immediately with a maintenance bond.
Right.
So they own it. So
Right.
this is something that
Okay.
needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Can I add one thing on
Yeah,
that?
go ahead, Nancy.
One thing I will say on our bonds, we've been getting performance bonds for 1 year and then maintenance bonds for 2 years. One thing that we are talking about doing is making them both for 2 years so that there's some consistency, because right now everything's staggered and it makes it very hard, I know, for you all to track as well as for us, so.
Okay. Hello, Mac. How are you?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
I'm Mac Walcott, architect. We all talked about a lot of things during this moratorium, and I think it would be helpful if some of the ideas are strategic visions that really are going to take a while to get our arms around. Some of them are housekeeping things. I hope that we'll have 2 buckets, stuff we can fix by October and stuff that we probably need to revisit in a bigger picture. And I hope also as we make these changes that y'all will publish something that starts with what problem is at hand and how we're trying to solve it. Because I think sometimes ordinances are just amended and why'd they change that from this to that? So if y'all can have a methodology that says, here's the problem and here's our proposed solution.
And Mac, that's a great comment. We've talked about that internally, doing a white paper
Yeah,
for these,
yeah.
kind of saying, here's the problem that was presented to us, and here's how we feel like we can solve it, and here's the ordinance to do that. That's a great comment.
And then that would generate the feedback, and then the technical writing can start, because sometimes the technical writing gets done before
Right.
the whole dialogue is started. A couple of thoughts also, if y'all could create a method, this is more work for y'all, but I remember years ago I was talking to a classmate of mine in LA, and he said it takes 6 months to get something permitted out here. And I said, no way, in Fairhope we do it in 2 weeks. And of course we're at a 6-month time frame now. So if y'all could map the current process now, whether it's a single family house or a mixed use development downtown, see where we are now with the time frames, and if we add new modalities like public hearings that you've talked about, let's see what the time impact is, and let's score ourselves about how we're doing, because if everybody would, like we all like to talk when we're out of the room, all of us that practice along the Gulf Coast, the 2 most challenging environments are Mobile and Fairhope, and that's probably a consensus. But, I mean, it's really and that's just who we are. So if we can improve that customer service wise, I think that'd be a good outcome from this.
And Mac, just to address that comment, we want to make it as efficient as we can, but we want to have good quality development. So, being lengthy, just for the point of being lengthy, is no value to us. I think my concern is, we want to do the appropriate level of review, but also get good quality development in return with that. And so we want to make it as efficient as we can, but also with good quality development. I came here from Walton County, Florida, and with 30A, and it took a while there too. You got good quality development, but the length of time to me does not represent whether it's a good development or not. So we are certainly, we'd like to. There are even a few things we'd like to do administratively that would take that from going to a series of hearings to maybe a shorter period for certain kind of developments that don't need that level of scrutiny. That's something that we're also going to talk about.
And a couple of other quick kind of big picture things is as we talk about growth, we're blessed or cursed with growth, depending on your point of view. I think there ought to be a narrative about growth somewhere in this discussion, because either we're here to do it correctly or better, or we're here to do something with it. And the concern that a lot of us have about affordability in Fairhope is everything we do that limits the supply of something drives the cost of it up. So if we're limiting the supply of apartments in town, well, the rentals are going to go up. And do we care about affordability? Because at some point, restrictions on the regulation side, it's demonstrated that drives cost. And do we have a point of view about that, or is it just because I think at some point we're going to be the most Why is there a housing shortage in San Francisco? Because it's a very difficult place to
And
build
Mac,
a
I think
building.
you're right. There's a lot of unintended consequences when you start changing things or creating new regulations. There is that impact that it happens, unintended consequences. I mean, when you start having, you start getting more and more expensive property, the price does go up. And you
Right.
do start limiting
Yeah.
certain segments who can't afford anymore.
So I hope we can look at that. The other one is y'all are kind of this new approach to things. Those of us been around a while, the tradition in Fairhope is cost shifting. Put it all on the developer, and then it goes away. Well, it doesn't go away. It goes to the purchaser. I mean, Chris is building a $120,000 water line that everybody in town can use. At some point, this infrastructure question is pretty important, and there's a fairness issue there too. That rather than putting it all on the developer, as John was just saying, when we build a road, it becomes the city's road. I hope we can talk about that because if we're concerned, I've heard about areas in the fruits and nuts area. Well, Dot would probably remember when it was dirt roads. The roads got paved with no thought about stormwater, and now the homeowners are being asked to bear the brunt of stormwater management in that area. Well, the city probably needs to own up to that they've allowed a neighborhood to develop without proper infrastructure. So I hope y'all can.
If I can address the infrastructure, one of the things I think is important when you look at comprehensive planning and long-term planning, and this is something that's done very well in a lot of parts of the country, is that you want to try to coordinate your growth around your investment, the city's investment in infrastructure, water, sewer lines, things like that. You want to try to coordinate your growth of that so you're maximizing your investment you've made by having the most customers in an area that's easy to serve. And so we're definitely going to look at that. Richard Peterson and I have talked about that. Typically with a future land use map or a comprehensive plan, you have future land use that you sort of tailor around the infrastructure and your capability to serve. There's no point in encouraging, medium or high density in an area that's not served by water or sewer.
No.
So we are looking at trying to be a little more thoughtful and coordinated with our approach to long-term land use planning and how it relates to utilities and infrastructure.
And do you think the infrastructure issue is a next year issue, or do you think it's a by October issue?
I mean, the infrastructure issue is a long-term, by its very nature, it's a long-term issue.
Mm-hmm.
There are some things that we're looking at in the short term with some of these studies that will be a short term, but ultimately, infrastructure is a long-term issue. You always have to be monitoring that and preparing for that because it's always maintenance. There's always lift stations. There are always extension of sewer lines, and at what size should you put in? If you have that coordinated with your growth, you can size the infrastructure to accommodate anticipated future growth in areas that you feel like can handle it from the standpoint of utilities, but also streets and things like that, and road networks. So there's a very, very thoughtful, long-term approach I think we're going to try to employ here, and so we can maximize our investments.
And what will be the next steps public-wise for you guys? You'll publish the white paper and invite comment, or what's the process y'all are
I think
thinking
we also have
about?
a town hall coming up regarding growth, I believe, maybe next week. I don't have the exact date with me right now, but July 18th, there'll be a town hall meeting, and and it's just an open forum again, I believe, as far as that goes, is growth and those kind of things, and the mayor may present a few things with that. But I guess my thoughts are going forward, we would draft some of these ordinances and bring them forward and start the discussion.
Okay. So there might be more meetings like this, because I think I was talking to a realtor yesterday, and I said, realtors are here today, but there's different constituency groups like Eric's talking about that'd be good to hear from, the home builders, the realtors, the design professionals, so.
Sure, absolutely.
Good. Thank y'all for doing this.
All right,
Yep.
thanks, Mac, appreciate it. All right, who wants to go next?
I got Trey Cordy.
Hey, Trey.
I got a few things. A lot of them are basically what everybody else has said. One of the big things, though, I've been talking to a couple of y'all before, when the zoning, it's probably a big overhaul, but is there any way to get the zoning changed to strictly density and use? Instead of, and I'm specifically more talking about the residential side, because y'all actually control density right now by lot size, which doesn't make much sense. And I know you say, well, you can come back and do a PUD or a village site plan and change it, but that just adds a whole nother level of meetings that you don't have staff for. It costs extra money for us, and it just seems to me it'd be a lot easier if you just zone by density and land use rather than all that other stuff.
Well,
so.
and that's there's two theories about that. When you start looking at lot sizes and lot widths, minimum lot sizes, you're looking more at a compatibility issue with surrounding properties. That's based on sort of an old Euclidean, what they call Euclidean zoning method. It goes back many years, where it's very separated. You want to separate uses and those kind of things. What I prefer is more of a integrated form-based approach, to where we're looking at, and this is really more for commercial mixed use to some degree. You're looking more at form rather than use. Use is important, but many times if you look at some of the new urbanism type concepts, and you'll see it in other places around the country, it's really based on functionality and how it looks, and the use is not entirely important. That's something that we would like to look at in certain areas of the city, not every area. I think it'd be difficult to go away from having the lot sizes and the lot widths. I think that'd be a sea change that would probably be difficult. We've not discussed that. That's something we can talk about internally and kind of weigh talk about the merits of it and doing that. But it could be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that it does, though, it forces cookie cutter development.
True.
Because we have to make a decision. Are we going to go what we can do, by the lot width by right of R1, R2 zoning, when we may want to do something actually even better for the city? In order to do that, then we've got to spend another 6 months of just going through the permitting process.
Right.
So you take a 20, but you take a 20-foot, a 20-acre parcel. Let's say it's 1 unit per acre, where you can have 20 houses.
Uh-huh.
Well, who cares if they're all 150-foot wide lots or all 50-foot wide lots? Who cares? You still have the same number of houses. So
right,
and you have less infrastructure, less runoff. You have more open space. And
right.
and it would act because y'all are penalizing. Yeah, but y'all are right now. The codes are penalizing people to do that.
Right.
So anyway,
that's an interesting concept. I think that's something we can look at, more of a clustering approach.
Just let me decide. Okay,
Right.
I can put 20 houses on this piece of property. Well, let me decide how wide the lots are.
Okay,
That's basically what I'm saying.
I understand. Okay.
The couple of things I hope y'all do keep is the narrow streets, allowing the narrow streets, so that helps calm traffic and all that. From a natural standpoint. Love the street tree requirements. Hope that doesn't change, even though the county may not like it. The LIDs, I'm not gonna, just real briefly, whatever y'all do, get rid of the 10. Who came up with 10? Because I was forced to come up with just some crazy stuff just to meet the 10, and I could have done some other things which actually would have been better for the development and everything, but I was forced to do 10. So y'all need to really reconsider that.
Okay.
Real quick on the wet detention ponds. Allow us to use some of these retention ponds as common area. As they get to larger, sometimes we take these retention ponds and make them larger to have a nice amenity, to fish in and do a canoe or kayaks and stuff. And you'd be penalizing that creativity and that use if you keep, disallowing retention ponds as open area.
And I will tell you that's something we are looking at. We are looking at the retention and detention ponds, and I've seen a lot of places that have retention ponds. They're large and shallow, and you can have they're dry, and you could have it's a passive recreational opportunity for developments, and that's something we're looking at, trying to make that a little more flexible. I mean, obviously, the stormwater is very important, so you got to make sure you're capturing your stormwater. There's no doubt about that.
Well, yeah,
But
I'm talking about even making them bigger to have a nicer amenity.
Sure.
Y'all won't allow that right now. So we have to do other things, and people love to fish and use a pond. So anyway,
the retention and detention ponds. One of the issues is the long-term care of those. Many times, several years may go past, 10 years may go past, and you start getting siltation in those. And then it's not carrying the capacity that it was designed for, so you have resulting flooding. Many times the property association, they're not familiar with how to maintain those or that they're supposed to maintain those. So we're looking at some ways to do some educational type outreach and also maybe finding some ways to address that a little more in a holistic approach, citywide.
Okay. The heights restrictions, you addressed it from a commercial standpoint, but I like to address it from a residential standpoint. Right now, it's 30 feet. When you're, Eric, I mean, sometimes you got to draw this house with this flatter roof, and it looks stupid. So, I don't see any reason why it can't be raised to 35. I think y'all were talking about redoing the definition of where it starts, but still, even in addition to that, raise it to 35 feet. I would love to see 40, but 35.
Downtown.
Well, maybe not 3 floors, but residential still too high. But let us go up to 35 feet. It would really benefit a lot of this new architecture too. Everybody wants these English Tudors, and that has real steep roofs. You can't do that unless you get a real narrow house. So anyway, think about it.
Eric, you had a meeting yesterday morning about this, didn't you? With
Sure.
with the height.
Yeah, we met with the home builders, and Wayne and everybody kind of came together with the definition. What we're looking at is the definition of measuring a building height the same way the county does, which actually reverts back to the way the building code does. On hip roofs or mansard roofs, what you would have is the building height is measured to the mean of the roof line. So that's going to be the middle between the peak and the eave. And I have a diagram, I didn't bring it with me, but what it actually shows is if you have a 20-foot section for a 2-story house and then 15 feet of roof line, it actually only measures to say, it's basically, that's 27 and a half feet tall because it goes to the middle of that 15 feet. Now, the other thing is it actually, the other portion of the definition, it is still the average of the grade at the front of the house. So if you're at 0 and 5 on your slope at the front, you'll start at 2.5, and you'll go to the middle of the roof line on a standard hip or gable or other type of roof.
Matt, could you come to the microphone? So we'll make sure we record everything.
If we don't get rid of the topography thing, you're penalized if your lot slopes to the road versus away
Agreed,
from the
and
road.
we talked about that because we have some lots that just have topographical problems. You have to have, in order to get a flat slab, and if it's high on the back end, that may put you 6-7 feet high at the front. We're trying to figure, it's hard to do that as a catch-all because some people may just choose to have a large area in the front of of this winding staircase going up. So what we may do is we're trying to find out if it may be a situation where if you've got a topographical issue, you can go to the Board of Adjustments, because that topography is one of the things they would take into account for a hardship.
Why not just measure from the main floor level and then be done with it?
That's
Right.
what my comments.
I understand.
Yeah, because you're penalized. You're just penalized. And the other question is, I know this sounds crazy, but who cares? Who cares if it's 35 or 40 or to the mean? If it's just limited to, say, a 2-story house,
Well,
who cares?
Answer that question. I wasn't.
Right.
Again, I've
Yeah.
only been here a short period of time, but it's my understanding that there's been complaints in the past where you have some of the areas are getting overpowered. Say in the fruit and nut district, there's some
Right.
smaller houses that are typically historical smaller houses, and then you have a big, large house that kind of overpowers the neighborhood.
That's where it started
And-
back
and
in.
it creates an incompatibility, I guess, in
Right.
some people's minds. That's where I think that came from, right?
It was back in, I think, 2001, 2002. Christopher Baker, when he was here, I was here at the time. We started getting very big houses built in the fruit and nut area next to what have typically been 1,000, 1,300, 1,400 square foot single story cottages. And there was just a big pushback from the people that lived there about the appearance and the size of these houses coming in, and that, at the time, that was their solution to the issue. We've got a lot of areas where it doesn't apply. We've got, certain subdivisions where you have larger houses, and the whole neighborhood is made up of larger houses, the Waters and parts of Rock Creek and other areas, and it's not an issue. So,
And, some of the things we've discussed internally to address those concerns is maybe going to a floor area ratio for certain areas of the city where some of the homes are, so the size of the home is proportional to the size of the lot. Those are just some ideas we've discussed.
Yeah, just be careful. Just like this issue that was targeted for the fruit and nut section has spread to the entire city, and that just doesn't seem possible. So, reasonable. So if y'all do something like that, I think you should,
Tailored, more
you
tailored,
defined
yeah.
areas and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. The last thing too is this is a kind of a significant change. I don't know if you were with the county when this happened, but the county has a way where you can go in for a say a subdivision. I'm talking about subdivisions now, and I give you a layout with the lot widths, everything, but it's a generalized grading plan. I do it, even a traffic plan. Say here's water, sewer, but it's not all these full engineering drawings. And get approval, and then because the planning commission, they don't look at these engineering drawings. Only the staff does. So they go, hey, the staff, if they meet all the slopes of the streets and the engineering calcs, and they go, yeah, and that's it. Well, let us have the opportunity to come up there and get actual approval, and then when we submit the engineering drawings, it doesn't have to come back up to the planning commission. It still goes through the staff. They still review everything. And a couple of things I can do, of course, is if we get turned down and we've only spent $5,000 or $10,000, man, it's not great, but we go, okay, we'll change everything. But if we've gone ahead and spent all $100,000 on engineering drawings and we get turned down, that's where lawsuits and just really conflict occurs. So that's another side of, another benefit of having that step.
Right. And I think about 05 in the county, we drafted that conceptual plan process, about 05, I think it was. That's a great comment. I think that many times as you go forward and you have all these engineered plans and you go to a meeting and there are some concerns that are presented, it's very difficult and very costly and very timely to alter those plans. So you're more entrenched because you don't want to spend the money to change them. Like you said, if it's more of a site plan approval process where you have maybe some conceptual engineering, conceptual ideas like that, you're much more able to address concerns and change the project without a tremendous amount of money being spent to do that. Right. Ultimately, at the end, you would have to have it all fully engineered, and that's something we've talked about internally doing. So the approval you would get would be for the site plan, and then the detailed plans would then come after that. So that's something that we've talked about. I think there's some merit to that. I know many times, when you go to a meeting and say there's a concern that's raised, for you to alter that street direction or alter it a little bit one way or the other, it's very, very costly, and there's really not much not much leeway to make. But if it's a site plan, it's a little easier to change, a little more, you're a little more able to address concerns as they come up. And so that's something we're definitely looking at. And we also kind of have put together a general idea of what that would look like on paper and what that process would be like.
All right, that's all.
Thank you. Another thing, too, we're looking at is any kind of site plan approval be recorded with the judge of probate. I know many times there's copies around. If it's recorded, it's available 24/7 online. So if somebody's doing work on the weekend and they want to see what the approval was, you can go pull it off the probate's website. I know in Florida they have development orders, and those are all recorded, so you can get those anytime. It worked very well. So, yes, sir, Mac.
In the process now, when we turn in a hard copy and a digital copy, if a citizen wanted to see that, they have to go. Why not make all that online too?
Another good comment. We are currently have a company under contract, the same company that provides the Revenue Commission's map viewer, Keat Consulting. We're going to be having that for the city to where the zoning is available through that map viewer 24/7. Flood zones, jurisdictional boundaries, those kind of things will be available 24/7. But also it'll have for new developments, it'll have a point on a map you can click on, and all the attachments will be there for that development. So if you want to know what's going on around you, you can click on that. You can go to the map viewer and find that location and click on it, and it'll bring up the attachments with the site plans and all that kind of thing. So we're trying to push it out there, have much more information available via the internet as we can. Right now, all we have is hard maps on the wall, and I think that's something we could definitely improve on because, first of all, we get a lot of phone calls from the public, from appraisers and people like that, want to know what the zoning is. If it's available online, you just get it yourself anytime you want it, and it cuts down on the phone calls that we get, but also makes it more available to the end user who's using it for a project or whatever they're doing with it. So we are going that route.
And also, projects that are being reviewed, when we turn in a project,
Mm-hmm.
may not be available online.
Well, we would like to go, I'd like to go almost everything electronic, because then record keeping is easier. Right now, we have paper file upon paper file. I mean, it's a fire hazard, really, Eric, if you want to know the truth about it.
Yeah.
But we'd like to go to much more of an electronic, a digital format. And ultimately, down the road, I'd like to go to even to electronics submittals online. And there's a lot that goes into that, and software and then training and those kind of things for people to use it. But that is probably a very efficient way to do that. When I left Walton County, we were doing that. We were going to an online review, electronic review, and also electronic submittals.
Just the program that the city uses to run all of our systems is called Munis. It's from Tyler. We switched over, the building department switched over about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. One of the things that I have requested in my budget is to have a Munis rep come back down for 2 days to sit down with us, because when we switched over 4 years ago, we didn't know what questions to ask. We'd never dealt with it. There are capabilities with Munis. They have said that there is a way where you can log in once we activate the module. There's ways where you can log in and see the status of your review. Now, this is from a building department side. It'll tell you when it was logged in, what stage it's at. Is it at fire safety? Is it electrical? Is it building? There are modules that allow, when our guys do their inspections in the field with the tablets, it should automatically email an inspection result to whomever the contact is. We just don't know how to use it because we just have never activated that system. So I have made that request. I think, I hope we can do that. I've talked to our IT director and to our finance director, and hopefully that will happen.
I got one question I got to ask. All my comments were based on what's written now. Can y'all tell us what new ideas y'all are coming up with, and behind the scenes and that kind of stuff that we may have additional comments on?
Sure. Some of the things we've talked about tonight, a little bit about that so far. We're looking at the site plan review process, making that a little more, I won't say conceptual, but not less engineered up front. We're looking at that and putting something together for that. We're looking at potentially requiring pre-application conferences. So when you come in, we'll have all the people there that will be involved in that project. Eric would be there, for example, and Public Works and people like that, to sit down at one time and tell you what the requirements are, so going into it what you have to do. Additionally, we are discussing potentially having a required meeting with the surrounding community. I know other places I've been that work very well, because prior to application, you would go and meet with the people within 300 feet of your property, for example, and get their comments and try to address any concerns at that time with them. And obviously you can't please everybody, but I've seen numerous times where a small issue could be addressed very easily, even before the design aspect started. For example, direction of traffic or lights and things like that. And so what that did, it kind of built a relationship with the neighbors, with the with the developer, and they were able to build a dialogue together and really try to mitigate those concerns prior to it even going forward with a site plan. So you were able to address those before you even submit it. So we're talking about that pre-application conference, community meeting, and then once you submit, that would all be inclusive in that process. Again, the retention ponds we're looking at, LID we're looking at, better coordination with the utilities. We're discussing that. One of the issues it's a fairly small issue, but something that has been brought to our attention is accessory dwellings. Right now, you really can't have an accessory dwelling because you can't have a bathroom. I'm not sure how that came about, but that seems sort of contrary to what the typical way of doing that is. And I think as long as it's controlled as far as size and bulk and location, accessory dwellings are a positive. It could be a place for elderly parent. It could be a place for an adult who may be getting started in their career, needs a place to stay, or it could be just a source of income for someone who may need that. But I think they can be done correctly, and I think that you shouldn't throw out the baby in the bathwater. And so we need to try to tailor that a little bit. So what we've done is we've removed the requirement, proposed to remove the requirement to where you can't have a kitchen. We want to make it a full-fledged dwelling. Obviously, there's parking issues, so you have to have parking and things like that with it, and we'll definitely control the location and the bulk and the size of it. So it doesn't become an adverse impact on neighboring property owners, but we do feel like that's something we can look at. That's just a kind of a snapshot of some of the things we're looking at. Height we're looking at, downtown we're looking at, trying to really get some more investment in downtown and get more activity downtown. I would even like to even see maybe a slight adjustment to the downtown overlay area, maybe create a little larger area for that. Long term, I'm a big believer in some of the form-based, transect-based planning, if you're familiar with that. I think that's in certain areas of the city that would be very good. The Fruit and Nut District is sort of a kind of really the single tax colony's original plans sort of did that, really. I love history, so I'd love to go back and look at the single tax and see what they did and what their design philosophy was. And you can look at the old maps and maybe try to emulate that in other parts of the city, because that worked very well, obviously, with the waterfront and the parks and those kind of things. So those are all the kind of a snapshot that we're looking at. There's other things too, engineering related issues, MOP issues we're looking at as far as the conflict and the redundancy in that process. We're putting together some things for that. We met as a group several times looking at the subregs. We're also looking at creating a unified development code. So we combine the zoning ordinance and the subregs into one document, so you don't have to carry around two of them. And the terms would be defined the same way in each document, and so that's being worked on right now. We've hired someone to help us put that together from the writing standpoint, and I think that works very well. That's sort of the traditional way of doing that, and so we're working on that as well, trying to incorporate some of the standalone ordinances we have now. Right now, we have a tree ordinance, and we'd like to incorporate some of those. And also get some, we have a lot of ordinances that seem to be inconsistent with one another, and we want to make sure that everything's consistent, because anytime you have these inconsistencies, it just causes questions and problems and interpretations and those kind of things. And I believe that, any kind of ordinance we put out there should be fair, should be consistent, and should be able to be interpreted, the same way every time. And so that's sort of philosophically, that's kind of our fundamental process we're trying to go through right now to achieve that. So,
I've got two more questions. And
yes, sir. Sure, go ahead.
Of course, Mike again. Mainly is addressing the moratorium. Do y'all have an idea when that moratorium may expire? And the second part of that question would be, if you have a project that is considered multiple occupancy, that is 3 or more, is that project automatically on hold, or are you looking at each project individually?
Well, if a project if the project's covered within the moratorium, we can't accept it at all. So we won't even look at it. We want to be able to take it in at all. As far as the expiration of the moratorium, is October? It got extended July 4th for 3 more months. October 4th, okay. October 4th, right.
Thank you.
Larry, how are you?
Doing great. The only thing that I would add on the process, until I started helping y'all with some review, didn't realize y'all had DRC meetings. If y'all would look at the possibility of inviting the engineer or the developer to those, a lot of times a lot of questions can get answered before a lot of things get written. I just think it'd be beneficial.
I think, that's something that in other places I've been, we did do that. We had a public meeting for the DRC, or the TRC we called it, and that's a good question. Bring people in and have a dialogue with them when there's concerns or issues. So that's a good suggestion. I think we can certainly do that. Just got to schedule a location in a room, and we could probably even stream it live if we wanted to. Have a much more formal type review meeting. That's all right.
Ryan Baker. Let's see, a few things that y'all talked about. The colony lots, they've always been under the wrong zoning. They're not zoned correctly. They're a substandard by nature, and they're penalized by nature. And I don't know if that was part of what you talked about, Chris Baker, back at the time, the goal of trying to minimize the size and everything that goes with them, but it's is exacerbated by the size of. So are you thinking that besides for FAR, which can hurt and help in some ways? I mean, there's rights that people are expecting on their lots now, and may go one way or the other on that, depending on the FAR you put it together with it. So are y'all looking at overlay on colony lots or anything like that?
Well, I mean, we're looking at everything, really. The overlay has not been brought up to us or discussed yet. That's something we can definitely explore.
Or different zoning or something? I mean,
Yeah, the problem that was presented to us was the fact that, you have some of these lots that people believe are being overbuilt, based on the house that was once there that they moved or tore down, and they build back houses that seem to be, from size and bulk, seem to be incompatible with the neighboring houses. So that's why when we were just throwing ideas around, that's why we're talking about the floor area ratio. Maybe that's something that we can do to make sure that it's consistent with the lot sizes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's an opinion based off certain people in the neighborhood versus what's allowed by right.
Right.
And you think you're going to have a conflict in realtors and things like that. They're selling lots, and
well,
so you all need to think about that. Other
any kind of ordinance you have, the public is going to have input as well as the builder and other people, and you have to kind of take all that together and kind of decide what's the best route to take, because the public's any kind of city government, you have to have that public input, and it's very good to have that. So we need to try to take as much comment as we can, and then devise a method that we feel like addresses the concern fairly, appropriately, and adequately.
On the colony lots, also, if you're looking at those in any way, the accessory building sizes, it's 25% of the rear yard. You end up with like 250 square foot. I mean, it's just crazy. So something else for you all to talk about and look at. You talked about the moratorium goals. It was pretty hefty what you just discussed there, and y'all been involved for 6 months now. You have another 3 months to go. How many of those do you actually expect to check off the list? Because to me, almost the majority of the things that you mentioned were really big picture items. Even the utility study stuff, I mean, we might have a study done, but the application, how it's going to relate to controlling growth, or I shouldn't say controlling, some sort of management and impact back to the developer in some way. So how are you prioritizing, and do you have a list and end goals for each one?
Well, some of the zoning and subdivision regulation things, I think we can do fairly quickly.
Sure.
The LID things like that, procedural, process-oriented things, those are, just the time to compile those is going to be the limiting factor. We can get those done. I think with the moratorium and, reviewing all the capacity issues, that's something I think that study's going to be done, I believe, next month or so, 2 months. That is the fundamental basic issue. Now, long-term planning and infrastructure, that is a long picture type issue. But getting some of those studies completed and also trying to get, some of the appropriate reviews necessary for infrastructure review related to development are something we can do also in that short-term period.
Are you expect to have the unified code completed by the end of the moratorium?
We hope to. Now, we have these amendments going forward, and so we've chosen to, when we propose amendments, we're going to propose them under the current zoning ordinance, so we don't over confuse it. But once if we get those approved, we'd like to then start plugging those into the Unified Land Development Code, because the formatting is going to change, the citations are going to change, everything else. So we'd like to move those forward under the current code just to keep it consistent, so it's not overly confusing. But again, migrate those back into a Unified Land Development Code, which is going to be a totally different looking document. Same subject matter, just different locations and different looks to it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. All right, anyone else? Mr. Cordy, how are you?
I'm Arthur Cordy. As you probably know, between myself and my nephews and cousins and stuff, we own quite a bit of the adjacent property to the city limits of Fairhope. I've been working with the city of Fairhope all my life, and my family's been working for 100. We've been here as long as the city has, working with the city. But the problem that I see is the change. One day they say one thing, the next time you go to come here, you've got something else to say. And I'm just using a little example of my project up at Fairhope Village. One of the biggest thing that was in 2006 was connectivity. We were asked to, I had 50 acres in the city at that time, zone B2, and the city fathers at the time asked us to bring in another 160 acres of my cousin's land, which we did. And they said we wanted connectivity. Well, we designed something with connectivity, and then everybody, the public, says we don't want to connect. So we have a fight that we're trying to do what the city asked us to do. We draw plans, spend a lot of money. The developer that was working on that project spent $1 million doing that set of plans, and it will probably never come out like it was designed in '06. Demands change. One day people want big lots, the next boom they want small lots. Well, we have to have the ability as a landowner to change with the demands. That's what drives this market. It's not what the public wants. It's not what I want. It's what the demand wants. What is the city's policy now on connectivity? I'd like to hear what y'all have to say.
Well, it's unchanged. The regulations have not been changed on connectivity. Not since I've been here for sure, and I think they probably remain the same for quite some time. Nancy, is that
Correct.
so? And if there is a rule on the books or a law on the books, we are going to be enforcing that. That's what we're here to do. And so now, as far as changes and adapting to changes, that's something that, again, through the site plan review process, that's something that we're looking at trying to look at ways to create a little flexibility with that, but also giving some assurances that it's going to be designed in a certain way and follow the certain philosophies or principles that were laid out by the city. And so I think that's something that we're also addressing. But as far as the connectivity, that remains unchanged. Now, obviously, I know what you mean. I've been places where you want a street through here, and the adjoining neighborhood don't want it, and
Right.
so then you've got a kind of a conundrum where you've got the legal right to connect to a street, but the people don't want to have that, and that's one of those cases you kind of take it case by case, I guess.
Right.
But if you were to follow the current law, I believe you'd be required to tie into that street.
Gotcha. One of the other things is we have found as Fairhope has grown, Fairhope's got really basically whether they want to say it or not, it really doesn't have a one direction to grow, and that's east. It can't grow north. Daphne city limits butts it now. You're not going to grow west on the bay, and you're not going to grow south because the people down there are not going to let you grow south. So you're going to grow east. We're very much east of Fairhope. Very much east of Fairhope. We have found every time we develop something, when I say we don't do any development. I don't think anybody. I started did the Woodlands, and realized real quick that I didn't want to be a developer. So we're land sellers, most of us, and we have found that once we sell a piece of land, everybody that's there is your enemy. So what do we do as landowners? What incentive have we got to be part of the city limits of Fairhope? Give me a couple reasons why we would want to bring another piece of our land into the city limits of Fairhope. All it adds is impact fees, people fighting us, doing everything they can to not do whatever we want to do, and we're going to do whatever the city wants, basically, and that's what we've always done. But we have a real problem when we have developers talk to us every day. I have people calling me all the time, particularly now with the market like it is, want to come in here and develop, and they see the infrastructure. Going back to what y'all were talking about on the impact fees, I think it's the most ridiculous thing in the world that the impact fees don't go for expanding sewer and water. I'm sure y'all realize that you're fixed to be surrounded by another city. Listen to what I just said. You're going to have a city surrounding you if some of the policies don't change. Now, that's just telling it like it is. We have the city limits of Daffy butts our land right now, and the biggest thing that the cities used to control is the sewer. Well, they don't control the sewer anymore. The sewer is not the bone that they could jerk back from you because it's everywhere. And the developer comes to us and says, we'd like to be in Fairhope. I'm going to say this, and y'all know this. Most developers want to be in Fairhope. And I want to be in Fairhope. I want them to be in Fairhope. But whenever we tell them, well, you got to build three pump stations to get your sewer to the city, they say, not no, but real no. We're not going to do that. I'm going to find a different way to do that. And they can now. That's the problem the city has today. At one time, they didn't have that. Water also. Water is available. So those are the two things that the city has that they need to expand, and not tomorrow, but today. And that impact fee could do a lot to make that happen, because developers are not going to pay for all y'all's pump stations. The city's got to put that out if y'all want to take in these areas, the city's going to have to absorb that. And like I said, they're going to pay big impact fees if they're in the city. We're looking at a development right now. Why would they want to come into the city and pay hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of impact fees for what? They're going to have the police protection. They're going to have the fire protection. So why would they want to pay the impact fee? Why would they want to come in and develop before they develop it? And why come in the city? I don't think that's right, but that's business. So the city needs to look and find a way, if it's a bond issue or changing the rules on the impact fees, to expand those utilities. Otherwise, it's not going to look, Fairhope's not going to be what we all want it to be, which is, to me, the nicest city in the country. So y'all think about that. And I'll tell you another little thing about when our developers come in, the amount of money, and they've been brought up today, about engineering. I have developers come in here and they have to spend $500,000 to work on something and not even know they're going to get to do it. In other words, they have a set of plans they might throw in the trash. I've got a set in my office right now. It's $500,000 worth. If something happens, that gets turned down, they can throw that in the trash. That's to me, that's not right to have the system that way. I'd appreciate if y'all look into trying to do it, and I'm more than happy to meet with you, talk to you about it, whatever, because I want to be Fairhope.
Sure.
Thank you.
Cordy. Appreciate it.
What could be the name of your new city?
Well, you know, as
you look, we as big as the city right now, so it can be very easy.
you know, as far as annexation to the city, I mean, obviously that's a voluntary annexation typically. So the city can't, I don't think we have the ability to force anybody to annex. It's voluntary annexation. I do think that when you look at Fairhope and you compare the property values, I think there's a huge incentive from the standpoint of property values to come into the city. I do think the city services are very, very good city services. That's obviously an incentive to come in. By its nature, the county serves a large number of people in a large area. I'm not knocking the county, but I think you get better services in the city, obviously. Police protection, that's big. We do service our police jurisdiction, but if you look at Daphne, they don't service their police jurisdiction with police coverage. They don't. They only serve their corporate limits. So that's not something that's guaranteed all the time. Any kind of commercial development, I would assume, if I'm a commercial building commercial development or going to run a commercial operation, I'd like to have that police protection and police coverage from the standpoint of things that happen in retail. So I think there's a lot of incentives for it. I mean, obviously, we can't make him do anything. We want to, again, try to get the best quality development we can within within the city, but also doing it as efficiently as we can, as fairly as we can, and fair to all parties. I think Mr. Cordy brings up some good suggestions about sometimes the upfront investment it takes when you may or may not be approved. That does pose some concerns for me and my perspective and my experience over 25 years. Like I said earlier, if we could find a way to have a site plan review process where you're not having to fully engineer a site and do more of a site plan process, that's what we're hopefully we can kind of bring forward and have that process underway. And then once you do gain approval, then you do the full-blown engineering plan. So I think that's something that I think we can agree on. That's something that we would look to try to do. All right, anyone else?
What's y'all's process? We talked a little bit about going to a design standards for the city. You and I have talked a little bit about that. How will y'all decide whether the city wants to go down that road where we talk about design standards more than setbacks and heights? And in parallel with that, I think a few years ago, I think in our planning ordinance, somebody inserted a requirement that metal siding is not acceptable, and I think some of the architects would think that was a peculiar concept, that a certain type of material is whatever. But are y'all? Is this in your October wish list or in your longer term wish list, or is it even on the wish list?
As far as design goes, I mean I think it's important, but it can be a slippery kind of a slope. I know places I've been, we had scenic corridors, and there were design standards and color standards and everything else. And so what you had is you got a lot of buildings that looked exactly the same. Same colors, same roof pitch, same everything. So I think Fairhope's really not about that. I think they're much more eclectic and want to see different styles, different variations. If you look around now, you have that now. I do think there are some minimums I think we could probably establish. That's not something that I would foresee, Mac, in this moratorium period. That's a much, much larger discussion. When you start talking about design and taste and those kind of things, that needs to be very well fleshed out with lots of public comments and lots of interactions from the public and the design professionals to make sure that's something that it's doable, for example. And designs do change. You mentioned metal siding and things like that, so you got to have something that's going to stand the test of time as taste change as we go forward. I do think there are some minimums. That's something that, just basic stuff that would, again, be quality development, tasteful development without overbearing standards. But again, that's not something I think I foresee in the moratorium. That's a longer term issue. Anyone else? Going once? Twice? Thank you all. What we're going to do is compile all these comments, and we're going to sit down together as a staff and compare our notes and sort of create a little worksheet about some of the things we've heard about, and then talk about those, and again start trying to develop some methods to try to address these concerns. I know from my perspective, I really appreciate you guys being here. You're our main customer. We deal with a lot. We want to make sure that we are being receptive to your ideas, and also that we are being as efficient as we can. I know your time is money to you guys as well. We also have to serve the public and make sure that everything's done in a big public forum, and that we're trying to address both sides of the issue. I know from my staff, and I know Eric feels the same way with his, is that we want to be rule followers, and we're going to follow the current rules, and we want to be as interpret those rules as consistently and evenly as we can. And so I believe it will be treated very fairly when we do these reviews. But also as we go forward with these amendments, we'll certainly want to keep you apprised, and there'll be other opportunities again for input. And I really appreciate your comments, and I think we heard a lot of good things. Some things we knew and had heard before, but also we have some new information that we can start looking at and making sure that we can address those concerns.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, I'm sure.
On LID, one thing that staff has seen is, and some of the handbook that he talked about addresses it, but is the crossover between engineering and the wetland specialists. I know some of the engineers here have kind of started combining with those folks to do some of the LID work. I think it makes a better product because on the LID design, because there are some components being really misunderstood or left out in terms of plantings and wildlife attraction and what those words mean. And I think we need some maybe dialogue between the wetland specialists and the biological component with the engineering component to get those LIDs to work effectively as they're supposed to. So if y'all can start thinking about that, I think that would also be a good idea to help us get a better LID design. So.
All right, Eric?
Kind of how, just so you know, what we've been doing is from a building side and from a planning side. As I mentioned, we had a meeting yesterday with the home builders. We contacted the Home Builders Association, talked about some of those. I do plan on having a meeting towards the end of this month with our wetland consultants and our wetland professionals to look at our wetland ordinance. What we would do is, one of the things we talked about yesterday with the home builders are drainage issues on individual lots. We're not looking at it from a subdivision engineering standpoint, but things, how to address stormwater and drainage issues on individual lots under permit, okay? What we would do is put all that together and then give it to to planning to incorporate into the unified land code. So it's kind of going to be a two-step process. We're doing some things individually under the building side that we will then incorporate all together. And I guess, Wayne, the purpose of the land code is you will have everything from wetlands to erosion control to building codes, fire codes, zoning, and everything all in one document. So that's the process we're taking at the same time. We don't have near the revisions or things we're looking at, the same number, but some very specific targeted items that we're seeing during the building permitting process.
All right. Yes, sir, Cliff. Last but not least, right?
Last but not least. I think Kathy, talking about these wetlands ordinance, I think she was a little bit lenient. You know, you got a wet weather pond half size of this room that 60 years ago, old chief had them go dig it to hold water for cows. And, the Corps goes down there. And like I said, said, well, there's nothing to it. It's not nothing to us. But, that's kind of part of the problem. It's just the federal government says it's fine, but the city says you can't get within 30 feet of it, and you can't put red dirt within 100 feet of it. It's the middle of a 10-acre field.
Right.
So, I think it's a more or less kind of a level, another level of bureaucracy that, we really don't need. And I just think it's a good example. Now, right. I know none of y'all were here when it was passed. Well, Nancy may have been.
I was not.
But probably the reason it was passed was just to stymie growth,
right.
Would be my opinion. So
From our standpoint, the one thing, probably the biggest thing that we hear as a city staff, if there's one common complaint we get from citizens, and probably our elected officials hear the same thing, is drainage, drainage, drainage. We hear it from everybody talking about stormwater and drainage in town and how that is handled. Going through wetlands are kind of nature's way of dealing with stormwater retention. So the goal, as explained to me since I was not here when it was written, is to protect the areas that the Lord said this is where the water is going to go. You start filling those, it's going elsewhere. So, but we also want to be somewhat reasonable. The Corps of Engineers has their standards on a nationwide level, but they're not specifically looking at the issues we're dealing with at the city of Fairhope or along the Alabama Gulf Coast. So what we would like to do, is bring our wetland, because I'm by no means a wetland expert. I'm just the guy who gets stuck enforcing the ordinance. We want to bring the professionals together to look at the specifics of what that ordinance says and what it requires to comply, and sit down with our internal staff and those professionals and decide if it's something that needs to be adjusted or amended, or it may just need to be left alone. A lot of that's also, whether or not our elected officials want to change it. That's an ordinance. So it's not something that we can say we're not going to enforce this portion or we're just going to change this portion. That's got to be voted on at the council level.
Well,
So,
I mean, I still
Yeah.
contend it's a very unfair ordinance.
okay, fair enough. I understand.
You
Well,
know.
can I add to the discussion? Eric is right. Nature has its way of.
Nature didn't do, they dug
Okay.
this hole.
Okay, but there are some that are hydric soils, and there are some components there that are truly nature's way of dealing with things. And in fact, that's something that, from a developer standpoint, that's why I said I'd kind of like to see that education go a little further,
Well,
because
then-
in terms of headwaters, when you get into wetlands and various headwater, that is a almost guaranteed exacerbation down the road.
Our concern
So-
is displacement of water.
Display-
That's the
yeah.
biggest thing.
I understand, but I
And
guess-
that, regardless of whether it's a Grady pond or it's an actual jurisdictional wetland, if it's a wetland, either way, it's displacement. So that's what I want to get some expert opinions on how that's
Yes.
addressed.
And I think you can account for that in your stormwater standards.
Sure.
I mean, if that pond was holding water, and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, I know in the county we did this, compensatory storage standards, if that was holding water and now it doesn't, you're going to accommodate for that.
You know, I guess my point is, y'all are stereotyping it.
Right.
And it doesn't need to
Right.
be stereotyped.
We don't stereotype
I mean, the reason the farmer dug the damn hole there was because he knew the dirt was heavy and it'd hold water.
Right.
You know, so, you know, that's all I ask.
Understood.
Real quick,
Kathy, could you come to the microphone, Kathy, so we can get you on the mic?
And I sort of said it, but maybe I wasn't clear. That's why I said there's a biological
Right.
value.
Right.
For a developer right now can't take that Grady Pond that is a wetland and has that functional
There
value
is some functional
of
value.
holding our water, but they can't convert it to a basin because it still says no development. So we need to look at how that's going to be used, taking the lids and taking the functional value, because we can't look at what's rational. Water is going there. Our designers want to put the basin there, but they can't because the city's ordinance
'Cause
says
it's a wet-
you
okay.
can't
Right.
build in a wetland. So
Understood.
that's the disconnect.
Right,
I don't think
understood.
we're fighting the functional value.
Right.
It's how do we take the lid and how do we make the ordinance work so that we're marrying those components,
Right.
because water's already going there. So if it's not a wetland that's jurisdictional, can we use it for the purpose that nature designed it?
Well, and I think this is really great discussion, because this is the first time that, I mean, I'm seeing engineers hire wetland specialists to understand some of those components. So I really think that everybody's going the right direction. And I'm proud that they're doing that, because that has been missing from the discussion. And even the landscape architects here, I see, could kind of work on some of the plantings, seeing the native plantings and getting to understand some of the functional uses of those would be a great direction. So,
All right, anything else before we break up? Well, thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it. And like I said, this information will be out to you, and we'll be discussing it further in the future. Thank you.